Okay. So, you might have noticed that in certain segments where my lightest or outermost pixels that I use for the areas where I ended up using this color the most, I actually went over the darker, the primary line, right, with my secondary. And the reason for that being is because if I, chose to, you know, um, maintain my primary, it reads like kind of like jaggy and it reads like a bit too heavily for my taste. And this refers back to the thing that we talked about, right? Like you want to try to make the line read as the line to have like a consistent weight throughout the stroke. So it's important to just manage your curves very carefully. Um, so yeah, does anybody have any questions about line segments and curves or AA or anything else that we talked about? Um, Also, I realize that my checklist is out of order, so sorry for like, going about this in a little bit of an unorganized way. Okay, yeah, cool. Okay, so I'm going to be going over like different methods of form building. How do you know what color to AA with? Okay, so for the sake of this tutorial, I've just been, I've just been that is a really good question. Thank you. I'm sticking to like 4-color palettes and things like that. So you want to choose two midtones between your primary line and the background. The background I'm using in this case is like, transparent, but let's just say this reads as white. So I will be coloring this white, right? Um, whoops. Um, but let's say for example, I was working with a darker background. Whoops. Sorry. I should. Oh yeah, another great tip that probably shouldn't need to be pointed out is that you should name all of your layers. But I didn't name my layers because I'm a scumbag hole person. Okay, so let's say this is our dark background, and let's say I'm drawing with a lightest line, or a lighter color line. Like I mentioned before, you want to choose two midtones. You can choose more or less. It depends on like how you want to approach, AA. Again, I like to use two colors. Your two midtones between your primary line and the background. So in this case, I have two midtones right here that are pretty handy. So I'll be going in and you know, in this case it's flipped, right? Because the color that I kind of like initially used for my the color that I used initially for like my secondary thing is like now the color that I use for the outermost edges of my anti-aliasing. Also, I'm just a little paranoid. I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing anti-aliasing right, but if I'm not, like, sorry. um, so yeah, that's how you choose like the two, um, or two colors, more or less, in order to AA. Um, the midtone that's closest to your primary line should be, used for the innermost edges, and the midtone that's closest to the background color should be used for your outermost edges. Um, yeah, okay. I'll never, ever, ever name my layers, and okay, I promise I will name the layers in the files that I upload onto the Google Doc, but just for my personal use, I hope you guys don't judge me too hard for being a disorganized scumbag. Oh, okay, a diagonal section. See, this always gets tricky, just because, like, a lot of, learning the AA, like, really weird diagonals is a lot of trial and error, at least in my experience. So, just for kicks, let's do another crazy curve. Oh, and I attached some pretty, like, helpful, like, tutorial things in the, like, lesson plan itinerary thing in the Google Doc. So if you guys want to check those out as well, those are by pixel artists with, like, loads of experience and the vernacular in order to express these concepts a lot better than I can. But again, with diagonals, you usually AA a lot more with exaggerated diagonals, right? Because those are the things that require the most smoothing. So, for example, really long segments like this, I would say, like, require, like, a lot. And this is just a personal thing. So when messing with, like, the midtones for your AA, you want to use more of your primary midtone than your secondary midtone for long lengths like this. And what I mean by that is, oh, whoops, that might be a little too much. So what I mean by that is, so for segments like this, I ended up using a lot more of this darker green than the lighter green, right? Just look at what happens if I use more of the lighter green than the darker green, and let's compare how those segments read. Well, actually, in this case, it kind of worked out, but usually it reads as if, like, this line is kind of, like, broken. So something like this doesn't really read that well from a distance compared to its counterpart. Oh yeah, those are, like, I have a compilation of tutorial links on my, like, Newgrounds, like, news post thing. I shared the same tutorial links on the Google Doc. Let me pull that up and paste that into the thing really fast. Or the chat. I don't know why I called it a thing. It's like a chat window. Oh, right, okay. Thanks. Thank you so much. You got it. Okay, great, right. Thank you. Seriously, thank you. That's so helpful, oh my gosh. I think one of my like favorite tutorials that I've linked in like the like itinerary is like the guide that like talks about like what not to do in pixel art. Yeah, better in 2Ds, things to avoid. I think that I don't know. Sometimes it's a lot easier to see like um, it's a lot easier to learn something when someone points out like the wrong thing to do. You know what I mean? And then you're like, oh, I don't do the bad thing now. Sorry, that was terribly worded, but you get the idea. Um, right. Again, a lot of AAing diagonals is a lot of trial and error. But I guess in general, like guides, is that for longer diagonals like this, or like a diagonal like this, requires more AA. And in those cases, you might be using more of your primary midtone than you would be using otherwise. Also, I don't know if you guys have like kind of noticed, but the way that I kind of like, AA is that I just like, just connect the two line segments with my primary midtone, and then I just, like go in the inside or the outside with my secondary midtone. And the decision to go in or out depends on like what I wanted to preserve from the primary line. So because the original like or like what I think would read better. So I talked about like, I want to preserve as much of the 45-degree diagonals and horizontals and verticals as possible, which is why I often choose to put my secondary midtone on the inside of curves, just because I personally just like how that looks, or I think that looks better personally. Sorry, I'm struggling with like talking right now. Sometimes like when you AA, it's almost like you're drawing the same line over again, right? Just because the decisions that you make in AA almost change the length of some of the line segments. So before I went in here, this read as like a 3, 2, 1 line, right? But as I added the AA, now it reads as like a 3, 1, 1 line. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay. Could you go inside and outside and? Yeah, totally. And I usually do that with longer line segments, right? You don't want to use. Okay, in cases where you do want to do the inside and outside with your secondary midtone, it's good to, again, go over your primary line with your primary midtone. That way the line doesn't read too heavily. So, for example, something like this. Right. But again, like you really do need to be careful because adding this adding your secondary midtone, like in an example like this, disturbs the curve, right? Like you have this like weird jutting out before it goes into the diagonal, and that just doesn't, you can see it from a distance, and I don't know, I just don't really like that. So I think in cases like this, it's best to just stick with adding your secondary midtone to the inside or outside. In cases like this, however, you can kind of like just go over your primary line with your primary midtone, and it reads like pretty well.